On January 1st, 1986, a body is pulled from a pond near a secluded cabin. How the body had ended up in the pond and whether or not it had been stuffed into a barrel would go on to haunt the investigation, or lack thereof, for decades. This is the case of Debbie Ann Wolfe. Today's case is an interesting and complicated one. In particular, there are certain discrepancies about the autopsy findings that have been mentioned by those who have previously covered this case that I will be speaking on today. For that reason, it is important that you watch this video all the way through to fully understand the points that I believe have been potentially misrepresented in this case. Debbie Wolfe was living in a cabin with her two dogs, Mason and Morgan, near Fayetteville, North Carolina, in December of 1985. She was a nurse working at the Fayetteville Veterans Hospital. Debbie was known, according to family, friends, and coworkers, as a reliable person. She was dedicated to her job and did not often miss work or arrive late. According to Debbie's mother, Jenny Edwards, she was punctual and meticulous. After working hard to become a nurse, Debbie was happy with her job and her life. On December 26th of 1985, Debbie finishes her shift at the Veterans Hospital. She calls her mother to let her know that she is on her way home and is last seen leaving the building, walking toward her car. As far as anyone knows, that night everything is normal. It isn't until the next morning when it becomes clear that something is wrong. Debbie doesn't show up for her 8 a.m. shift at the hospital, and she hasn't answered any calls. Jenny receives a call from the hospital asking if she knows where Debbie is. Jenny, now knowing that something is very possibly wrong, tries to call her daughter herself. Now, when Debbie doesn't answer her mother's calls either, Jenny decides to visit the cabin where her daughter lives. Jenny called a family friend, Kevin Gorton, to drive her to the cabin. And when they arrive, Jenny is alarmed to see that there are beer cans littering the ground outside of the cabin, where Debbie's car is also parked in an unusual spot. In addition to this, Debbie's dogs have been left outside and are unfed. When they entered the cabin, it was a mess. Jenny was alarmed by this discovery because she had always known her daughter to be a tidy person. Jenny and Kevin found multiple personal items of Debbie's littering the floor of her cabin, and what appeared to be Debbie's uniform from possibly the day before was lying on the kitchen floor. While searching the small cabin for Debbie or clues of her whereabouts, Kevin discovered Debbie's purse. According to some reports, it had been shoved between the mattress and the bed frame, but according to other reports, it was simply stuffed under Debbie's bed. Unsure of where her daughter could be, Jenny decides to check the answering machine. Maybe there had been a call and Debbie needed to run out to help someone. Now, when Jenny pushed the play button on the machine, she was met with this.
Hey Deb, missed you here at work today. Just wondering how you doing. If you're able to give me a call up here at the ward, I'm at 822-7007, or give me a call at home tonight. You've been out a lot of days. You made me worry when you missed another one. I just want to make sure you're okay. Bye.
The message had been left earlier that day and claimed that Debbie had missed multiple days of work. However, Jenny had spoken that very morning to staff from the hospital and knew that it was only this particular morning that Debbie had not shown up. When it became clear that Debbie was not in the cabin and they couldn't deduce where she could have gone based on the state of things inside, Jenny and Kevin retreated outdoors to search the area for Debbie. The two walked the land around the cabin a short distance away and around a nearby pond where Debbie would sometimes walk her dogs in warmer weather. When they recovered no sign of Debbie, Jenny called the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department. Jenny is devastated when she is told by the sheriff's office that she cannot report her daughter missing until she has been gone for 72 hours. Left with no other option, Jenny waits, hoping that her daughter will arrive within the next few days. It isn't until Debbie has been missing for 5 days that a full-scale search ensues. Now, the sheriff's office arrives with a team of officers and bloodhounds to look for Debbie, but again, there is nothing that points to her whereabouts. Jenny is frustrated at this point with the lack of urgency being shown to her daughter's case and asks that the pond near the cabin be searched. This is when Jenny is told that the sheriff's department thought that the family had already searched the pond. and so they didn't bring any divers to the scene. Realizing that she would need to take action on her own to keep the search going efficiently, Jenny asks whether or not she is allowed to hire her own divers to search the pond. Jenny figures that this way it would get done and she wouldn't have to wait for the sheriff's department to get around to it. With the okay from Captain Jack Watts, Jenny enlists the help again of Kevin Gorton. Kevin reaches out to a friend of his, Gordon Childress. Now the two men have experience in rescue work, and together they begin their search of the pond on January 1st, 1986. Childress's first dive into the pond reveals a set of footprints and drag marks just off the bank of the pond. He resurfaces to pass this information along, and then he goes under again. The search of the pond didn't take long. Only 30 feet out from the bank, Debbie's body was discovered stuffed in a barrel at the bottom of the pond. Childress resurfaces again to inform Jenny of the devastating news. The Cumberland County Sheriff's Office is called once again, this time with the news that Debbie has been found and that her body needs to be retrieved from the bottom of the pond near her cabin. Divers are sent from the Sheriff's Department and Debbie's body is brought up from the pond, but notably the barrel was left behind underwater. According to later reports from the Sheriff's Office, there was never a barrel in the pond. What Childress believed to be a barrel in the murky water had actually been a jacket that Debbie was wearing, which had ballooned out behind her as she lingered in the water. However, Jenny tells a very different story. According to Jenny Edwards, after her daughter's body had been pulled up from the lake, she had heard divers and officers discussing what to do about the barrel. As the officers on scene are getting ready to depart, she is approached and told that they will be returning the next day to retrieve the barrel. Jenny then says that when the divers returned the following day for the barrel, they couldn't find it. It had simply up and vanished from the pond altogether. It isn't only the fact that Childress said that he found Debbie's body in a barrel, or the fact that Jenny had heard officers discussing how to retrieve the barrel, that makes Jenny certain of the barrel's existence. Jenny very clearly remembers a large oil drum barrel that had been near the cabin. She states that this barrel had resided in the same location for a long time and that it had been used for target practice. It wasn't until after the Sheriff's Department had decided that the barrel never existed that she realized that the bullet-marked barrel near her daughter's cabin was missing. Though the barrel was already gone, there was still a clear indentation on the ground from where it had sat for so long. Though Jenny brought this up with the investigators, her worries were again pushed aside. Now, an autopsy had been performed on Debbie's body the day after she was pulled from the pond. It was determined during the autopsy that Debbie had abrasions on her fingers. Her body was considered to be in a relaxed state, with her eyes and mouth closed. In Debbie's lungs, the medical examiner found approximately a half teaspoon of water. So what does this all mean? Now, according to many outside the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, the findings of the autopsy point toward a homicide. The abrasions on Debbie's fingers suggest that she may have fought back against an attacker. The relaxed state that Debbie had been in suggests that she didn't die of drowning, because if she had drowned, she likely would have been distressed and trying to get out of the water when she had died, not as relaxed as her body suggested. The little amount of water would seemingly indicate that Debbie had not died of drowning and may have been deceased before entering the water. But according to law enforcement, the autopsy does suggest that Debbie drowned in the pond. In the end, the cause of death was listed as drowning. The manner of death was listed as undetermined, because the medical examiner couldn't say definitively if Debbie had entered the pond accidentally or had been forcefully drowned by someone else. There are a number of theories as to what could have happened in this case. Notably, the theories of the Sheriff's Department and the family differ greatly. So what potential events could have unfolded that day? Let us start with the primary theory of the family. According to Debbie's family, they believe that Debbie was murdered and that her body was placed into the pond after her death. Debbie's mother, like many others looking in on this case in the decades since it happened, believe that the autopsy points to Debbie having been killed before she entered the pond. Many have claimed that the relaxed position of Debbie's body suggests that she hadn't struggled and hadn't been drowning, and that the minimal bloating and decomposition also suggests that she wasn't in the water for the entire time that she was missing. Now, there were no traces of drugs in her system according to the autopsy, and she never usually went near the pond during the winter. So the theory that she could have accidentally fallen in, or that she was intoxicated and fell in, doesn't seem to fit. Debbie's mother was always adamant that the clothing that Debbie had been found in did not belong to her. 2 months after Debbie's autopsy, the mother received the clothing that she had been found in. The clothing included brown corduroy pants that were too large and too long and unzipped, a bra that was 3 cup sizes too large and 2 sizes larger in the band, Nike shoes that were a men's size 6, a regulation army jacket that didn't belong to Debbie and didn't have a name tag inside of it, a black Pittsburgh Steelers t-shirt that no one could identify as something that Debbie did own or would typically own. Now, another point of concern for Debbie's mother was that there had been a volunteer at the Veterans Hospital. This person wanted to be romantically involved with Debbie, but Debbie had told him that she wasn't interested in anything more than friends. Jenny believes that the voice on the answering machine was left by this very same volunteer. The police interviewed this man, and though they did clear him, Jenny since said that she had found it highly suspicious that he had moved out of the state just days later. Jenny Edwards has always strongly believed that the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office had taken an uninterested approach into Debbie's case. Due to Jenny's concerns, the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office did ask the SBI to look into the case, to investigate their investigation. And though a probing of the investigation had been requested, I wasn't able to find any confirmation that it did happen or anything that had been found from that probe. At this point, the sheriff's office states again in the media that they never saw a barrel in the pond. A spokesperson for the department states multiple possibilities for how Debbie may have ended up in the pond. She was playing out with her dogs and fell in. She may have knowingly or unknowingly been standing on a thin sheet of ice which broke and she fell through and was either unable to relocate the hole she fell through, or she may have suffered a form of shock that could have caused a heart attack-like event. Now, the theory of the sheriff's office has always been that Debbie somehow ended up in the pond accidentally and died as a result, with no foul play involved. If the sheriff's department is so adamant that Debbie's death was an accident, then why do so few people agree with the department's views? Debbie's cabin had been in a state of disarray, which Jenny claimed was highly unusual for her daughter. Debbie's purse had been stashed in an unusual place for her. Debbie's car had been parked in an unusual spot as well, possibly indicating that someone else's vehicle may have even been at the cabin when Debbie arrived home from work that night. There were beer cans littering the ground outside the cabin, which was unusual for Debbie, and it was a brand of beer that she wasn't known to drink. Now, a large burn barrel that Jenny said had always been at Debbie's cabin was missing at the same time that Debbie's body was claimed to be found in a barrel in the pond. There was also the strange voicemail left on Debbie's answering machine that had suggested that she had missed multiple days of work, when in fact that wasn't true. The clothes Debbie was found in didn't appear to belong to her and were unfamiliar to everyone who knew her. But what about the autopsy findings? Though many have pointed to the fact that Debbie's body was in well enough shape for her family to have an open casket funeral as being suspicious, I feel it is important to point out that while it could be suspicious, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. In cold water, especially water that has little to no marine life, a body that is submerged even for a few days can still be in well enough shape for an open casket funeral. I personally feel that this may be the case, seeing as it was the middle of winter when Debbie ended up in the pond. In addition to this, while one may think that it makes sense that someone who has died of drowning will be found in a tense position, reflecting the distress that they were in at the time of their death, this is not necessarily the case. My research seems to indicate that it is possible for either scenario to be true, that the body of a drowning victim could at times be found in a tense and distressed position, but it is also very typical that it is found in a relaxed state. While some people looking into this case have claimed that Debbie's eyes and mouth being closed indicates that she was dead before entering the water, it is actually completely possible that a drowning victim's eyes and mouth could end up closed, especially left in the water for a period of time. Most importantly, we do need to discuss the amount of water discovered in Debbie's lungs. In my research on this case, it has been mentioned a number of times that Debbie couldn't have possibly drowned because there was only a half teaspoon of water in her lungs. While at first look this claim seems to make sense, it's simply not true. Not only is this something I discovered through my research, but it is also true that a family member of my own who passed away from drowning only had half a teaspoon of water in her lungs. There was nothing suspicious about this family member's manner of death, and it was certainly known that she did in fact die of drowning. And yet, she too only had about a half teaspoon of water in her lungs. My research seemed to indicate that this is actually pretty common for there to only be a small amount of water in the lungs of a drowning victim. So while it seems like almost no water at all when we first consider it, it turns out that it is actually enough to suggest that someone may have truly drowned. So if Debbie was in fact murdered, what may have happened to her? Most people seem to think that the following scenario is a good example of what may have happened to Debbie when she returned home from her shift on December 26th. Debbie is pulling up to the cabin to find another car parked in her usual spot, causing her to park somewhere else. Debbie finds a person or persons belonging to that car either inside or outside of the cabin. At some point, Debbie is attacked and murdered. The cabin becomes a mess either during an attack or when the person or people go through Debbie's belongings, either before or after she has arrived home. The attacker or attackers then stuff Debbie's body into the barrel and they deposit it into the nearby pond. Other variations of this theory include that the attackers may have left with Debbie's body, brought it back after the family and police had searched the first time, and then placed it in the barrel and put it in the pond, thinking that no one would check the pond after the first search. It's also possible that Debbie could have been confronted by someone in the parking lot outside of the Veterans Hospital. This person either drove Debbie and her car back to the cabin or forced Debbie to drive them herself back to the cabin, where either the attacker parked in an unusual spot or Debbie purposefully parked in an unusual spot to tell people later on that something had been wrong that night. The last two theories that we'll discuss could potentially explain an event where the barrel had been present but then disappeared the next day when officers returned to retrieve it. Theory one is that a police officer was involved in Debbie's death. This theory would make it possible that the attacker knew that the property had been searched, and they could have returned with Debbie's body to put her in the pond, thinking that the area had already been searched by police initially and that it wouldn't be searched again. If an officer was involved, then they could have also known that the barrel had not been retrieved the same day as Debbie's body. They could have possibly returned and retrieved the barrel before police got to it. If an officer was involved with Debbie's death and anyone else within the sheriff's office was aware or even simply believed that an officer was involved, it could explain why the sheriff's office didn't seem to take Debbie's case very seriously. Now, theory two is quite similar to the police officer theory. In this theory, rather than a police officer being involved, it may have been a soldier at the nearby Fort Bragg. Now, if it was a soldier, this person may have also been aware of details of the case that weren't available to the general public, and there could have been a push from the base to get the sheriff's office to go easy on the investigation. Though it's not something that we would want to believe happens, we know all too well these days how corrupt military bases can be when it comes to investigations involving its own soldiers. Now, this theory could also explain why Debbie was found in a regulation army jacket that didn't belong to her. In the end, there are a lot of possible explanations in this case, but very few real answers. Though I believe that there are a number of people out there who have accidentally misrepresented some of the details in this case, I do still believe that Debbie's death is quite suspicious. Personally, I don't feel that Debbie's death was an accident. There are too many strange details, too many things that just don't seem to make sense to me. While I tried to do my due diligence in researching the claims that have been made about drowning victims and the state of their bodies, I would like to be clear that I am no expert. I did the best I could with my research and had a small amount of personal knowledge about this topic, and with that information in hand, I don't believe that the discrepancies discussed by so many people in this case are actually that strange for a drowning victim. All that said, once again, I am no expert, and I do not claim these things to be absolute fact. There are many people out there who know far better than I do about this topic, so please do keep that in mind when considering the circumstances in this case. Unfortunately, Debbie's parents and siblings have all passed away without knowing the truth of what happened to their loved one. Now, we may never know the full truth of what occurred in the late night and early morning hours of December 26th and 27th in 1985. If you do believe that you have information relevant to this case, then I would highly suggest that you contact the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office at 910-323-1500. Let me know what you think of this case in the comments down below. What theories do you have about this case? What about this case strikes you as odd or seems odd to you more than it does to others? Whatever it is, just remember to please stay respectful in the comments down below. Now, as always, my sources are pinned to the top comment below this video. And please continue to help me put these cases back into the public eye by sharing. Now, whether that be by sharing this video or any of the resources I've provided down below, just keep sharing. The chances are that someone somewhere knows something about one of these cases that are covered on my channel or any other channel like this. And if the case is seen by the right person, it may just be enough to crack a case wide open. Finally, thank you so much for watching today's video, and of course, I will see you all again soon for another.